The doctors are in the house.
Your favorite Friday
Their respective houses.
and your favorite Friday evening habit while you're on shutdown, nothing good on television. Tune in to the doctors on Facebook Live and what catch the reruns on YouTube.
Or just watch streaming on Netflix, Amazon,
But there's nothing good on it.
Disney Plus.
Honestly, there's nothing good on Netflix. There's nothing good on. Honestly, television died.
I mean, Frasier's on Hulu and Cheers is on Netflix.
Yeah, I'm not a fan
And
of
most of Taxi is on Hulu.
It
Did you
depends upon
catch-
what your tastes are, though. I mean, it's like Amazon. Amazon. I mean, both Amazon and Netflix do a lot of like international things. You have to live with the subtitles, but
Yep.
and plus Amazon's finishing up. They're doing like season 6 of Bosch, kind of a crime
Bosch,
series.
there's another Bosch coming
Yeah.
on tonight. I mean,
Yeah, I'll be binging.
it's only out of force of habit that I'm on this show as opposed to watching that.
Then they have that. Then they have that anti-Phyllis Schlafly show on.
Yeah, when does that launch anyway?
It's on already, Mrs.
It's on already, the Hulu thing.
Yeah. No, it's. I thought it was Amazon. Mrs. Maisel.
Oh, that's
yeah.
a
Oh
good
no,
show.
I thought you were talking about the Hulu has a whole thing on the Equal Rights Amendment and Phyllis Schlafly. Isn't that
Oh,
what
I
you-
was I was talking about the show, the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Yeah, it's a good
Trashes
show.
Phyllis Schlafly.
It's that's just it's an in character riff. I mean, if you've got a comedian who's living on the Upper West Side of New York, chances are they're not going to be a conservative.
See, I
I'm
remember
just saying, Dick Morris aside, not a good chance of that
Hey,
happening.
I remember back when Archie Bunker used to always plug Phyllis Schlafly on both of his shows that he
See,
did.
he was Queens, so
Yes,
that
he
was
was.
a different part of New York.
You have lost the millennials in the audience.
Yeah, I think so. I know.
And on the panel.
When has Dwight ever been one for dated references?
Hey,
oh yeah, never.
By the way,
Oh,
let's
no.
Just, I wanted to point out this week, marks major milestones. The 50th anniversary of Apollo 13, and as President Nixon was briefed at Goddard about the explosion. And NASA did a very nice hat tip to NASA. They did a great retrospective on President Nixon's briefing that he received at Goddard by NASA back 50 years ago. And President Nixon was also, remember, the president when we got to the moon. It was President Nixon in the White House. But just by Nixon.
So let's go ahead and get into our
Before we go off on a tangent that we don't want to, Don, take us away.
All right, let's get into our general update on where we are with coronavirus and the numbers. Johns Hopkins, as of earlier this afternoon, 2.2 million cases. I went and I looked and compared to what I think we did last week, and so that's up about 32% reported worldwide. 149,000 deaths. That's up about 47%. And they're also now reporting we have about 3.3 million citizens U.S. have been tested. 672,000 infections in the U.S., up 37%. 34,000 deaths, and that was up a whopping 89%. But that's testing. More things are happening. Things moving fast. We will get past that at some point in time here with all of that. But what's interesting about all of these numbers, and you can take them and do whatever you want with them, is just that announcement from China out of Wuhan, right? I mean, they decided to revise the numbers up about 50%. So that brings China's numbers to a whopping, total for the country, about 4,600.
As if anyone believes that.
It's like, honestly, if anybody believes anything the Chicoms say, and I've got a bridge to sell them.
Huh.
Yeah, I think the real news this week, though, is the president's guidance on reopening America that he passed on to the states. A few comments on that. One, I think it's great. It's very consistent with what a lot of states are doing already, but it helps kind of create a standardized metric for people to look towards as to where they are in terms of the reopening process. And I think that, Governor Hogan said it this week, there's light at the end of the tunnel. We're not hitting those metrics yet, but we think we'll be hitting them very soon in terms of 2 weeks of declining cases, which is what the doctors that are advising President Trump have recommended for
Ryan, I want to ask you a question, though, about that, because we talked about this a little bit on Tuesday when we were together. Does the guidance that the president issued, does that settle the quote controversy about federalism and in terms of who had the last word, who has the final authority on reopening states versus the federal government?
I don't know. I think that it kind of is settled that it is a state authority at this point. But, some governors are still unhappy with the president. Today Cuomo, during his news conference, they cut to it as they normally do, and he was very upset because Trump tweeted that he's been complaining too much. So
He has been complaining too much.
You know what? I had this conversation today. I mean, Trump is really in it. Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
yeah,
state.
exactly.
Let me
The,
tell you,
the
thing is, this
states are
whole
pissed
thing
if he leaves
is-
the state, and they're pissed if he tries to make a decision.
one
This
thing,
whole thing is nobody knows what's going to happen. It's all go as you fly as you go.
Yep.
There's no right answer.
And
Just
he
like what
doesn't-
Jackie said. There's no right answer. No matter what you do, there's going to be people against him.
Yeah.
And I saw a
People
meme
be
today. The
happy.
quickest way to open the country up is if Trump says we should keep it closed for the rest of the year. Democrats would go in and fight against him and say, let's reopen it tomorrow.
Right.
Well, but I think an important point
you
is
think people would be happy the stock market's going up. Since yesterday, the stock market's been up. I mean, it's rebounding. The market's coming back. Things are getting better bit by bit.
I think it's worth looking at the difference in among the states as to the number of cases, the prevalence of the cases. You really have a different environment, and I think that it really certainly federalism makes sense as a legal concept, but as a practical concept, the status of the states are very, very different.
Right, and we've seen a lot of differences in terms of how the governors, how the states have handled this, right? In terms of deciding when to reopen or close and all of these things, and what are, as we've had a kind of that pre-show discussion, the essential worker, question.
Right.
What constitutes essential worker and essential business? The states have very different, takes on that. When I was talking to my son who's living in Arizona, he said that where Governor Ducey out there initially had like golf courses open and some other places open, the mayor in Phoenix, who he says is going to plan to run for governor when Ducey's term is up in a couple of years or whatever, she complained loudly about that. And so there's a lot of also there's the Republican Democrat, just the local officials fighting about what that is. There's a lot of businesses that maybe we consider essential, but the governor doesn't, or vice versa. Comments?
I remember back when we used to consider any business that earned a profit essential, but those were the good old days that we no longer live in, apparently. But it really is a problem, especially with there's always going to be minor differences state by state, and some of it is ideological, and some of it, as Mark said, is just practical. We live in a country that is very geographically spread out. So the situation in North Dakota is going to be very different than the situation in New York City. But I think some states have definitely really gone a little bit over what could be considered reasonable, especially like Michigan is an example that comes to mind right away. It seems the governor of Michigan, I didn't realize that you'd be more likely to catch the coronavirus if you're self-quarantining at your vacation home instead of at your normal house. But, they just using this as an excuse to exert control over people's lives in unprecedented ways. So I think I think that's important because as we're starting to push towards reopening the economy and pushback might start to grow over the measures and people are going to start to get angsty and impatient, the more that the states that have overpushed more, I think, are going to get a fiercer pushback against what they're doing and more of an urgency from the citizenry to get back to normal.
I think, normalcy will come. We'll get there. And what the president had, his plan yesterday was spot on perfectly. As he said, there's some states that can open today if they wanted to.
Andrew Cuomo said that today also. If he was a Republican, he'd be attacked for that.
Exactly. Well, they attacked Trump for saying it, but then they gave Cuomo a pass.
Yeah.
But he is the dumbest governor in America, and that's a lot of governors to choose from. What do you guys? You guys hear all these? You hear there's a protest coming to Annapolis. I think it's this weekend or next week. About
tomorrow. Yes.
Tomorrow.
Saturday at noon.
And it's like not to be. Okay. Are you nuts? Why are you going to do this? It's like, are you stupid?
I think it. No, but
it's like,
I'm not sure when. I'm not sure when we're going to have this debate. But listen, there's a continuum of risk versus safety, and different people come down on different points along that continuum between risk and safety. And so, as we come to the point where we're going to consider reopening it, it should not be surprising that there are going to be a lot of variations in the way people come down on that trade-off.
I mean, I feel like people, I mean, almost like Democrats and Republicans, people have fallen very solidly into one of two camps: is the stay home, probably going to stay home after the states open anyway, to be on the safe side, and no, the economy is crashing. We need to get back to work. We need to reopen and do business as normal. And honestly, ultimately, it's going to fall somewhere in the middle.
Right.
Once the states eventually do reopen in the phases that Trump laid out, it's going to be at half capacity. Concerts, restaurants, bars, all of that, half capacity. There's going to be a new normal, and I don't think people have fully kind of let that sink in yet. I will say that, and I shared this article with my mom, who's still in Florida, that I read today that Governor DeSantis is reopening some of the beaches.
Yeah, Jacksonville tomorrow.
It's interesting. There was on the part of to coin a phrase, Don, the mainstream media, a kind of almost a perverse expectation on the part of them that some of those states that were the slower to close things down were somehow going to have the most catastrophic response because they weren't shutting things down. And I think, as we've talked about, those governors were responding to local conditions. The same thing I think is going on. Forgive me, I get my Dakotas confused, in South or North Dakota, which took a
North is the one that's up north, a little higher.
No, that part I know. So the issue there was that the governor hadn't shut things down, and there was all sorts of angst about a spike in cases. But it turned out that shutting down would have had absolutely nothing to do with it, because most of the cases were at a meat packing facility that would have been deemed essential in every state and would have continued open. But there's this sense on the part of media that they want to point fingers at the governors in, how shall I say, red states that may be taking a slower posture to close down, that somehow they're being, taking a more dangerous course, when in fact, part of it is their states are less threatened than, say, to use an extreme example, New York.
Yeah, and last night on the Maryland Young Republicans had a online event with Andy Harris, and there was some Democrat in the I'm going to assume they're a Democrat. Maybe I shouldn't assume that, but they're in the comments complaining about how whichever Dakota it was had a astronomical spike in cases. And then somebody asked, they go, "What was that spike to?" And they were like a few hundred. So you have to kind of keep in mind the population differences where, percent on a percent basis, if you're having a top of the line spike, but it's you only have a few hundred cases, that's really not something to worry about. But to Mark's earlier point, I think you can even go bigger than looking at certain states. Let's look at certain countries. In Europe, Sweden basically kind of resisted what the rest of Europe has done and hasn't really closed. They basically told people, practice social distancing when you can, be careful, wear a mask if you want to, wash your hands, but have very limited closures of businesses. K-12 schools have still been, or what their equivalent to that is, have still been in session. And if you look at their cases per capita compared to the rest of Europe, they fall somewhere near the median. So it does beg the question, was this all necessary to the extent that it was? But I mean, at the same time, you never really know, because it's impossible to know what would have happened had we not done it. I mean,
but
the people.
There's other factors there. Like, we don't have a heat map of every single person who traveled out of Wuhan to whatever country, or how many people traveled from Europe. Are there parts of Europe to Sweden who had been in contact with someone who had the coronavirus? I mean, there's so many factors to have in mind there.
Yep.
And to your point about the difference of variations from state to state, even within a state, I was talking to my cousin today who lives in rural Pennsylvania up by Amish country, and their mayor said they only had 35 cases in their county.
I mean, this whole thing, I think there's a level of overreaction. I think I understand, like in our area. I mean, Dr. Ackerman, who we had on the show Wednesday, I mean, he put it. I mean, he made a lot of sense when he says, rural areas, it's not, it depends on where you are and how. It's not really it's a bigger issue for the more urbanized areas. The rural areas are not as affected. I mean, you got somebody living in, say, Southwest Georgia, they're not nearly as effective if you live in Atlanta.
Actually,
Georgia.
he made a different point. He talked about the availability of health facilities in rural
Yeah.
areas,
Yeah,
and expressed concern that they wouldn't be adequate to a surge.
I think it may have been a conversation we had offline,
Oh, okay.
but I couldn't remember if it was.
I think even if it's not related to the conversation that was on Direct Line Wednesday, Dwight does bring up a really good point in that, I mean, the more local, the better here, right? Because even when you say Maryland, and we're not the worst, but we're certainly not the best in terms of the cases and the increases thereof. But it's mainly concentrated in those 270 corridor and 95 corridor counties, right? People in Garrett, Allegheny County are in the counties on the shore, with maybe the exception of Ocean City, because you don't want tourists flocking there. Sorry, Dwight. But, Cody Leach on the Eastern Shore should be able to go out in Queen Anne's County with much less risk, because there's a lot more natural social distancing that occurs. But when you have statewide mandates, even, there's a lot of problems, which I think some states have had more of a tendency to leave decisions that can be left to the local level to the local level. I would like to see some of that starting to happen in Maryland, just because while we in Montgomery County will probably be in it for the long haul, some of these other counties can ease restrictions a little bit more, because I do think it's not right to hold back the entire state when really it's a regional problem.
Although it's worth kind of making a marker that Maryland's cases total have continued to go up much faster relative to the rest of the country.
30% since Monday.
Yeah. The DC area is I don't think there's a lot of predictions anymore that we will get like New York, but I do think that, I mean, we have a lot of the same issues, and we kind of caught it earlier with the social distancing, but we still have a metro system. We still are a densely populated area with a suburbia that is commuting all around and intermingling. So that's why Montgomery County and Prince George's County have been driving the case increases in the state of Maryland, with Baltimore City, which they kind of have different issues with people not necessarily adhering to the social distancing as much. But Montgomery and Prince George's County in particular is because of those reasons and being part of the DC metro.
I think the rumor that I heard is they're anticipating the peak in Maryland to be in the next 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and let's do a quick exit question here.
No, just real quick. The only issue I have with like opening part of the state and leaving like the more dense populations is that they're gonna if parks and all that stuff open up everywhere else, people are gonna leave Montgomery County to get away from everybody else and go spread it there, and that's the issue.
Yeah, all of Cody Leach's chicken nuggets will go to the shore because if they open.
That's why you have to keep Ocean City closed. But I do see your point, Jason. And it's really hard to know, right? Because
going to cross over to Frederick or Western Maryland, it's not that long of a drive versus going from New York City to Syracuse.
Hey, Ryan, let me just ask you, but going back to this whole thing with Sweden, I mean, the other thing I noticed too was that Germany is actually planning, they've been kind of closed down. They're planning to reopen. The schools, I guess, are going to start. Was on Monday or something like that. And and Chancellor Merkel has said that, small businesses can reopen, not large businesses, small business. And I guess it'll be kind of a rolling thing. And then also, I guess the Netherlands they've been in school. They've continued school as well. I hate to even actually posit this question. I mean, do we look to Europe in a little bit of ways to see how they handle that?
I think Germany
That's a dangerous question.
Germany is a better place for us to look to, because they really followed the same general strategy that we did. But the difference is, I mean, they've executed a little bit better, especially on testing, right? That's really been the big failing of the United States. Our entire strategy is predicated on the fact that we can reopen once we have adequate test capacity, which we don't have, and we're not really close to what we want. And I think a lot of the problem is that we ramped up production very well of the personal protective equipment, of the ICU beds, of the hospital capacity to prepare for a worst case scenario that, because people adhered to the social distancing, didn't happen, or presumably that's why it didn't happen. So now having to shift that focus into test capacity is the challenge that we're going through right now. And I think by next week's show, we'll have a better idea of how successful that is, because this is, I mean, obviously an ongoing story, and we're kind of in the throes of it right now, trying to put pressure on companies, and companies stepping up to aid with this when possible. It's also a lot harder to retool to make tests than it is to make masks, right? Anyone can make masks, whereas making tests.
We've seen that in play. I mean, we've seen tons of companies shift what they usually produce to make masks, make gowns, make PPE. You don't see that story coming out. Ford shifts production to coronavirus tests. It's not that easy.
But it's really hard to make a test compared to a mask, which I think is part of the problem.
So Don is undoubtedly waiting to jump in. CNN managed to get egg on its face this week because they attacked Elon Musk
Yes.
for saying that he hadn't actually provided support, and
You saw Elon's response, right?
yes, and Elon's response was pretty devastating. And and what was fascinating about it, and let me just complete the sentence. Basically, he had thank you tweets from a variety of sources, hospitals in California saying thank you for providing the machines. They had thank yous from the governor. It was pretty conclusive. But I thought, Don, appreciate that CNN's defense of itself was, well, they didn't get back to us for comment.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a second, you had a bad story. You didn't have any support.
Because
And-
far be it for them to take responsibility for
I
making
mean,
mistakes.
remember, CNN, this is the network that gave us Operation Tailwind. This is the network that basically makes up news when they feel like it. I mean, CNN, nobody's watching them.
Well, I mean,
And
look,
it shows in the ratings.
I think Dwight, we have to be fair to these networks overall, though, because of the coronavirus situation, because really of President Trump, kind of masterfully in a lot of ways, taking over the White House coronavirus briefings. These cable networks, they are doing very well ratings-wise, right? I mean, the ratings are shooting through the roof for all of them, and they jockey in terms of whether or not it's CNN or Fox or MSNBC, on the cable side, in terms of who's getting more viewers in any given time frame during the day or evening. But one of the problems that they're facing is that while plenty of people are watching, because of the business shutdown, their bread and butter isn't there. Their advertising has plummeted.
That's why they want a bailout.
But Don, I have to push back on that ratings thing because as far as I know, and I know this just from asking friends because I don't have cable, CNN and MSNBC, they don't even air him when he's on.
Well, they've been cutting away. Like, when Trump did his thing, this has been their debate. CNN and MSNBC have been debating whether or not to cover it because they realize, they're like, wait a minute, these briefings, it's kind of like a Trump campaign deal.
Yeah.
I don't want that. So when Trump threw that video up, that was like that campaign video attacking the media, CNN immediately cut away from that.
Yeah.
But Fox knows that this is good for them, even though the president has not been overly kind to Fox. I mean, basically, when Fox goes off the reservation in the sense of if they want to criticize or attack the administration, Trump comes out fighting. He doesn't mince any words, and he says, "What's wrong with those guys?" But I'm okay with it. I'm okay with a healthy discussion between these cable networks and whatnot. But if for people who are, if you don't like the news, then you don't have to watch the news. I know a lot of people are now kind of tuning out because they're just kind of sick and tired of the politicization of the news, of how I think I want to go back to what you were saying, Mark, with the media and CNN, but just other things. We're seeing even with this essential workers, right, and the governors making these decisions, red states, blue states. The media has politicized this whole thing. This is not what we want as Americans. We don't need to politicize this. We need to come together and work together. But the media is really driving things apart.
Everything is political. Every single thing is political these days. And honestly, I mean, one of my favorite things to do when I'm bored is to watch people fighting in the comments of Facebook sections. And I pick a nice, particularly juicy Fox News headline. I read the comments. People think Fox News is too liberal now.
I have to admit to my guilty pleasures here. Every once in a while, I've gotten much better about it, but sometimes someone will say something so absurd, I just have to respond. And today in Governor Hogan's comment section, before he had the press conference, some elderly woman, seems probably a very nice person, was saying, "I hope he announces a total lockdown of the state where no one can leave their houses except for firefighters, police officers, and healthcare workers." I go, why?
Calm down.
Do not engage the trolls, Ryan.
I go, why would you want that? I mean, I said by all measures,
I
the
get my
current
Red Bull then?
the current things seem to be working. So why would you step it up? We're talking about stepping it down. I never checked the responses. I decided it was a bad idea. But
Got a quick exit question. When do you guys think we in the DMV will be open or start the phase opening.
Well, we
I'd
talked
say-
about this ahead of time, right? And we have to define what does open mean because of
Phase
course, as
1, phase 2, or phase 3?
we've talked
Uh,
about we've talked
one.
about various stages of this, and for Dwight, we agreed that
It's when I can go
the
to
test
same
will be when
when stained glass
Dwight
pub opens up.
when Dwight can go to a pizza place and sit down and have a pizza inside the restaurant.
Yeah.
Yes.
With more than 10 people.
I think we'll be
Is
able
that
to do
full
that
capacity
Yeah.
or at half capacity?
mid-May or early June, I think, for Montgomery
I
County.
agree.
I
We'll be able to
agree.
sit down and eat in a pizza restaurant. There might only be half as many tables. There might be people
Exactly.
afraid to do it, but something tells me Dwight's going to be one of the first people willing to
June
take
is
the
coming.
risk.
Somebody's camped outside the door when Mama
June
Lucia
pizza and
unlocks.
politics. June pizza and politics.
But even when we quote reopen, whether or not it's May 1, May 15, May 30, whatever the date may be, how long will it take before things become somewhat more normalized? I mean, a restaurant or whatever opening May 1, how long would it take them to actually get to a point where they may be somewhat close to pre-coronavirus levels?
I
I'm
think
gonna
that
say the fall.
October for
I-
that.
I mean, the summer is going to be rebuilding that revenue they lost.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's
And
going to
there's
be
still
very
gonna
gradual.
People who are hesitant to actually, I mean, they might be more comfortable going out to pick up their food and actually walking into the restaurant, but still might not be at the point where they feel like, well, I want to ride this out. Let's see how other people do when they go out into the world. Are
And
they getting sick, or
Yeah,
so should
people
I
are going to
stay
be
home?
cautious, waiting for that false positive to come out. Like, okay, it's
Yep.
safe now. Then wait, then the second curve.
I think that Jackie comes on a really good point, and I think it might not even be a conscious choice, right? That they're saying, oh, let me see how other people are going to do. There's a lot of people right now saying, I'm not comfortable leaving my house. We need to wait for a vaccine. We're going to wait 18 months and lock down. But I think when people see their neighbors going out and it's okay, I think a lot of people are going to get off their high horse and realize, okay, I can maybe not right away, almost certainly not right away, but eventually, even the most adamant among us, the woman in the comments section asking them to lock down and say that they'll arrest you for going for a walk through your neighborhood. Even she will go out when she sees her neighbors doing it for a period of a few
And
months.
I think we're going to see the same kind of reverse, or I guess I'm trying to think of the right wording here, but I think we're going to see the same people going out first that we saw being the last people to choose to shelter in place. It's going to be the
Yeah.
younger people, this can't get to me. Me and Jason, 1 week already into the quarantine, finding the one open.
4 of the 6 people on this panel were at Stained Glass Pub the Saturday before the lockdown.
I know our
After that, after the following Saturday, Jason and I went out to dinner in Virginia. We called and we found like the one hot pot restaurant open in Virginia, and I got angry phone calls from my entire family.
This is
But
Okay, let me ask you this though. I mean, just as the panel, in terms of a restaurant opening and you being willing to go into a restaurant, what would it take for you to feel comfortable to do that? Because I think there are going to be a lot of people. I mean,
Honestly, I feel comfortable now.
Yeah.
Because the
Yeah.
biggest threat is who's making your food. I'm still going out getting food. And that's the biggest threat. It's like food handling.
I think
And if we're
they-
comfortable with
have to be
that,
tested on a
I'm
regular
okay
basis.
with going out and eating inside of a restaurant. I'm okay with like every other table. But
well,
the biggest threat, like I said, is the guy or
I
the
think
person making
what
your
will
food.
bring people into the restaurants, especially the older people, the OLD people. If you do a 2-for-1 special, they will be, and you put it out there at Leisure World, they will all be
2
there.
for 1, but it has to start
Oh,
at
man.
4:30.
Yeah, 3:30.
so Dwight,
Ageism or something. What was that?
What's that?
Dwight, I just want you to know that, as some of you know, Dwight and I occasionally are panelists on 21 this week, and don't disrespect our audience. Leisure World is our audience. I don't know about this show yet.
10 of your
but,
20 viewers?
exactly.
Yeah.
But let's
But I mean,
move
Dwight, I
on.
mean, do you care if the people, the restaurant workers, I mean, if they get tested or, I mean,
Would you want them wearing a
would the
name tag
restaurant
that says
make
"I've
it
tested
work?
negative for coronavirus"?
Actually, I think they should. It's kind of like, all restaurant workers are already tested for tuberculosis and other diseases before they can handle food.
Or,
That's not
you
a-
know, talk about a flashback.
As someone who used
Speaking
to
of
work in a
OLD.
restaurant, they're not even tested to see if they have the papers to legally be in this country.
Yes, exactly.
What about, okay, well, how about flip it and say, what about the patrons, us as patrons?
Yeah, exactly.
Would-
The guy
should we
sitting
be
next to
tested?
you.
I mean, should they give us a temperature check when we come in? I mean,
So here's actually another question: is do you want to have tested positive, or do you want somebody who had the disease now has immunity and is negative.
It's got to be the antibody test. It
Those
has
will
to
be
be.
high quality.
I,
Gather my
I do
resume
not
workers.
have
herd
it.
immunity, right?
Here's the question: is would Dwight be willing to drink a vial of coronavirus fluid if he can go get stained glass pub sooner?
Absolutely. You know,
Oh my God!
You would
guys-
prefer it as in a pizza.
You know,
You
you know
guys-
the worst thing about it is that actually we know the answer to that. As scary as it is.
Yeah, that's why he just said yes.
But here's the Dr. Ackerman also said no problem. He's confident that we'll have a cure, basically a vaccine at some point in the fall. I will be in first in line for it.
Yeah.
But
I think we're touching on a bigger point here, which is something else that has come up. Is are we going to get to the point where we're going to be required to walk around with an identification that says I have been tested negative?
See,
And
all right,
that's
so
how we
Dr.
would
Fauci
take it
recently
out.
went out and said that you can go out and meet your Tinder date still. So if it's safe for that, I think we're safe to go get some pizza.
yeah,
Oh my
He
God.
said use some discretion and not use everyone you hook up with, but he said everybody's willing to accept some higher levels of risk.
You have to be.
but
You have to get a certification for other things.
Ryan,
But anyway,
Ryan,
we'll go there.
okay.
correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but early on, I mean, in China, didn't people have an app where they were like, red, yellow, green, kind of a thing like that, and it kind of enabled people to tell where they were and that whether or not they were able to actually get into certain facilities and buildings.
I don't know about China, but I do want to tangent into another point. I'm not sure if this was on the agenda, but Apple and Google have partnered on an app for contact tracing in the United States, something that other
Wow.
countries have done, but
Well,
making it as opposed to a government surveillance program, a private sector, and what they're claiming is going to be a completely voluntary opt-in program. So
I'm
We
gonna
already
go
have
down the
Google
rabbit hole.
timeline.
I bet they were already doing it, and now they're just making it public.
yeah, well, my question.
They had the technology and they said, "Great, we
Now
can
is our
roll this
chance."
out finally."
Now, so my question for all of you though is, if there's a voluntary opt-in program where you can basically be notified if you came into contact with someone who had the virus, would you opt into that program and let
I
Apple
got
and
nothing
Google
to hide.
surveil
Honestly,
you?
honestly, like
Nope.
I can talk about like a vacation to Germany and without my computer being on, and I'll start getting ads for it. I know that they
So,
already know.
I see Mark shaking his head.
I thought that story was going to go somewhere else, Jackie. Sorry.
I know what you were thinking.
No, I don't trust the way that data is used, and I think the benefit is pretty minor. I'll tell you, my daughter keeps telling me that I should turn on Alexa, and I'm like, no way. They're keeping all that information down. They know what you're saying. I mean,
You don't
protect
have to turn her on, Mark. She's
You
listening
don't.
anyway.
No, you don't. You
No,
know.
let me show you guys.
Okay.
Are we getting a product placement?
Alexa's always turned
I
on
don't
around me. Don't worry.
But one of the things, Ryan, one of the things I found out about it because I read a little bit more the last couple of days is that one of the things, like, so I have an older, iPhone, right, a 6 Plus. It cannot get to the latest operating system, right?
Yep.
iOS, and it only for Apple, it's only the 13 point whatever right now. So mine can't actually upgrade to that. So I couldn't go into this program if I wanted to.
You're lucky.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah. Well, that you know of. I mean, to Jackie's, it might have been Jackie or Mark that made this point. They might be doing all this stuff anyways, and not just telling
I'm
us.
curious though.
By the
and
way,
I think that
Alexa
the-
isn't listening to anything in this.
Well,
I
it's
don't
not
think
plugged
it's
in.
a soundproof box.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna say I'm curious just among the panel because we have an even split here of two different generations of like how comfortable are you with cookies and the concept of the internet knowing pretty much all your information. To me, I have nothing to hide. I grew up around technology and if they're gonna use all this to send me targeted ads, at least it's advertising
See,
for stuff I'm
the
interested
the difference is Dwight and I have a lot to hide.
I actually jumped to an extra. We pioneered the internet. We invented this stuff.
Dwight, I didn't realize you were Al Gore.
We both of us have our defense counsel on speed dial. We don't want to.
Dwight's got a bunch of NASA secrets he doesn't want people to know.
Yeah, but
one thing
Party
about
revealed
this is,
Facebook
as
enough.
we speak about this, though, that kind of that larger question, though, in terms of our privacy, is the coronavirus, has COVID-19 changing things that where more people are going to be willing to give up some of their privacy to be able to be better informed because of the nature of the virus and the worry about contracting and potentially dying from it. I mean, does this open up a whole nother can of worms on privacy?
I think it definitely does, and I think that's really related to Jackie's point in that there's an increasing comfort level towards it anyway, and like a lot of other things, the virus is just accelerating the way things were going. The same way of work at home, where it was kind of moving that way anyways, and that just accelerated it. And I think that we're definitely moving that direction, and the comfort level is certainly increasing.
See, I think there are actually more efficient ways. I mean, for example, you've got the digital thermometers that can test, and you can, track where there's been a spike in temperature. People who actually, if you put your phone, if you were somehow able to use the sensor mechanism on a phone to do temperature, that would create a whole nother thing. Everybody would.
Let me tie that together even further. You're seeing a huge increase in telemedicine, and we've just said that point that your phone is collecting all that information. I mean, obviously, medical companies claim that when you're doing a telemedicine visit, it's all on a secured network. You're still on a cell phone or on a computer. Someone's getting that PHI. But people are still willing to do, over the phone telemedicine calls. I think even if people, you could be an older person who says, I'm not giving up my information. I'm not, giving up all my private health information for the sake of my safety. But, I have a telemedicine call with my primary care doctor. You're probably already doing it.
But Jackie, the sad thing is the people that are talking about this are the ones that are giving away all their secrets by telling them the first street they lived on, their favorite color, their first car, their high school.
Dwight, you're the only person on this call who's taken a Facebook quiz in the last week.
Public service announcement, do not do those Facebook surveys of what's your elf name? It's the street you lived on, your first pet, your favorite teacher in high school.
But, while we're still on this a little bit, Jackie, others, in terms of the PHI being so widely available, Dwight held up the watch. There's all kinds of apps and things like that we do, whether or not it's our own fitness trackers or whatnot. Is that not somewhat beneficial though for healthcare workers? If you get in an accident or whatever, if they are able to actually, tap into some of that your medical history on the spot,
absolutely,
maybe better.
Absolutely. Or even if it's like one of the things my smartwatch does is measure my pulse, my heartbeat. Is they could get smart enough that if you stop, if your heart stops beating, that your watch dials 911 for you.
Oh, it already does that. The Apple Watch, there was a case where some climber fell, and the Apple Watch saved their lives. Called 911, told them where they were, and.
I mean, I think that there's certainly a lot of good.
I gotta get my Android anecdotes.
Yeah, that's what I got.
For next week's show.
See,
So we gotta balance this Apple talk.
Yeah, I think that
Dwight's the big #1 Apple fanboy.
To kind of cap off this conversation, I think the way we got to this place in a lot of ways is the business model of the internet has essentially been advertising and personal data in exchange for free services, and because people don't realize they're paying for it, and but I think as tools become more common and we're seeing subscription models come on the rise, both in the enterprise space and in the personal space, I think we could see, and there's almost a counterculture of people against the collection of data. I think they're definitely in the minority, but they're there. So that'll be the interesting argument over, in a macro sense, over the next 10 years. We'll see if that movement starts to gain more steam. And I know the Mozilla Foundation, for example, is piloting a program where you can opt in, and they have a certain number of websites that are participating in this, where it's essentially, instead of using ad block, you're paying them a subscription fee. It's $2 a month, and it gets distributed to all the different partners, and they don't serve you ads. So you're essentially creating a private opt-in network, which is, I guess, the alternative business model. So we'll see. I mean, there's some movement in the opposite direction, but I think Jackie's right.
I do want to shift away from this topic because I can see it in Dwight's eyes. He's been waiting all night to talk about logos and corporate mascots, so to speak. In devastating news, we need to report the tragic death of the Land O'Lakes Native American.
Oh no!
The Butter Maiden.
By the way, the Land O'Lakes logo. Some parts of the old country, they probably think it's the goddess of wealth and prosperity. There's some people that probably view it that way.
The secret to prosperity is butter.
Or is that the sun-made rate? But by the way, but it's are we getting too PC as a country? I mean, I know we're.
Oh yeah, definitely, absolutely.
like-
Absolutely.
I'm the
But,
anti-PC
But
spokesperson.
here's the thing: why, like, what is going to be next? Is Chiquita Banana the next one to go, or Aunt Jemima? I mean, I'm surprised Aunt Jemima still is
Don't
out.
go there.
No.
Yeah,
According
we're
to-
going to go to Aunt Jemima.
Ryan.
For example, we really wanted tonight.
Yeah, I don't
No,
think
but-
so.
but-
That's not the one we want to protect.
No, but we've also.
Yeah, seriously,
Redskins.
Dwight.
Someone talk about the Redskins quick.
No, that's not my point, Mark. You're missing my point. My point is this.
I'm scared of your point.
My point
Go
is
ahead. I'm sorry.
that is a far more offensive
Yes.
logo than, say, the Keebler Elves. By the way, that's also another one that they say it's offensive to short people. They
It's
say,
offensive to elves.
they say what do you call
The Lucky Charms.
Lucky Charms? They're saying that about the Quaker Oats guy. They say it symbolizes white power. Like,
What?
yeah. Oh, they're crazy.
I
about
went to a Quaker school.
that. And then you
It's
have,
They were. They
I-
were
But
like.
it is lunacy. I mean, go back. Let's go back to this. We were starting with the Land O'Lakes. Our
Tropicana
Indian
got rid of
women
their.
here. I mean, so the company's been. It's a dairy cooperative. It's not not owned by a real corporation.
Land O'Lakes, Florida.
Fortune 500. It's a dairy cooperative that produces the butter and the cheeses and stuff like that. So they're going to their 100th anniversary of the company is next year. So they're moving away from this. I guess they look at it and they say, this is probably not going to go over really well if we try to celebrate the 100 year. There's all the politically correct thought police are out there and they'll attack us. So we're going to either go with the scenery in the background or we're going to use the dairy cooperative members, going forward. They've used the logo apparently since 1928. She came in 1928. But one of the things that just strikes me is that there was a quote in online from the Independent from a woman, a North Dakota representative who happens to be a Native American. And she said that, this is just another example of the sexualization, kind of the sex trafficking and the sex objectification of women, of Native Americans. I'm like, have you taken a look at that butter made?
Right.
Really? I mean,
Yeah.
And honestly, and what bothers me the most about PC culture is all the people who are offended on behalf of all these minorities are like white college kids.
Yeah, it's like the people that are. It's like they're offended by. I mean, when are we
I'm
gonna?
looking at you, Ryan.
Yeah, I'm not offended. My thought is, what's the damage to their brand? I've always recognized Land O'Lakes by that logo, right? I mean,
Right.
I would say they probably have really high brand recognition.
Mm-hmm.
Like the logo quizzes. I don't know if any of you have played those online games, but Land O'Lakes is one of the most commonly guessed correct logos. There's a lot of brand power to it, so I wonder if there's any consequences to that in terms of maybe more people will buy generic butter because they don't see that same Land O'Lakes logo that they're
butter
familiar
is
with.
butter, right? I don't see any difference if I don't see the Indian on it anymore.
Actually,
all the
no,
same.
But Don, I'm gonna speculate you were buying generic butter before.
I buy
The logo
Kerrygold.
change.
Probably
I like
so.
Irish butter.
I don't buy the butter in the family.
Okay.
By the way, Land O'Lakes is really good. Their butter's really good.
Yeah.
No,
Dwight
got
is
a
not
blind-
buying generic butter, but
Next week on Dr. Politics, the blind butter taste test.
Ooh, that would be good.
that one we don't want to go to.
I'd be down for that.
We gotta have some homemade bread to go with that butter.
I could hook you up with that.
But I mean, what's with all this cultural appropriation or misappropriation,
Well-
depending on how you want to phrase it?
People
Well-
need to find something to be offended
Well, I
about.
remember a few years ago that Tropicana got rid of the little orange girl. That was they got rid of her, and now and that was basically a trademark signature of a Tropicana juice carton with that little girl with a basket of oranges on her head, or in her hands or something like that.
Dwight, I mean, as Montgomery County residents, I mean, and people who went to high school here, I mean, one thing that we know for sure too is that we've seen that happen on the sports teams in our county.
What was your high school's mascot? You guys were the Indians.
Mine was when I went to high school at Northwood. They were the Indians.
Mhm.
I don't even know what they are today because
I'll
the
do
Titans.
you know what? I'll
They're
do
like
you
the
one
Titans.
further, Dwight. There's still a huge movement at GW to change away from the colonials because
Yeah,
colonialism is
right.
racist.
Isn't it supposed to be referring to George Washington?
Absolutely. They want
Okay.
us to be the hippos
That,
instead.
that's the most
Yeah,
ridiculous.
hippos, yeah.
You
By the
see,
way-
it's one thing when the PC police come in. I still don't agree with it, but when they come in about symbols that they are actually talking about, let's say like Crusader, it's not any one specific person, but they're called the Colonials because of George Washington. They're not talking about colonialism.
Well,
So you're just
Jackie,
throwing in a red herring of talking about something that's completely, I'm not going to say completely unrelated, but that's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
at all the thing it's referring to. Dwight?
and Jackie, you also know they're also thinking of they want to change the name of the school from George
yeah.
Washington University. What are you going to call it? Hippo U?
No, they wanted
Alexandria
to change the name of the
Ocasio-Cortez
Marvin- They
University.
wanted to change the name of the Marvin Center because
It's
Oh,
better
what
than
would you
Rhino
change?
University.
What would you change the name of the university to?
I don't know.
They probably maybe Charles E. Smith.
Bottom you.
Charles C. Smith.
Because he
That
gave
would be, now that would be interesting. Is naming rights? Put the naming rights up. for
Dwight,
sale.
Dwight,
Yeah.
do you want to write a
not?
check? It could be Dwight Patel University.
You know, they have some notable alumni at GW they can name it after. Like, you could name it
Alec Baldwin.
Alec
Terry
Baldwin
Robertson.
University, Roger Stone University. There's a lot of
James
options there.
James
No,
Frank
but I would
University.
like is for the Koch brothers to offer a substantial amount of money to see it and just see the interaction that would go. GW George Washington versus Koch University.
Well,
How'd they
I
handle
was
that?
curious because, and I looked this up before they announced who our senior commencement speaker was going to be last year, because I was like, I don't want it to be a politician because they're not going to pick someone who agrees with me politically, and if they bring Hillary Clinton in, I have to miss my graduation, and that would just be sad. The only Republican speaker they ever had was George Bush Sr.
Mhm.
And all the other politicians. Had I graduated a year before, my commencement speaker would have been Cory Booker, and that would have sucked.
Hey, Mark, well,
And I say that as a New Jersey resident.
There's a Scalia Law School, right?
Yes, there is.
At
Yes.
George Mason.
George
was
Mason.
that funded through Koch or something like that to establish that, right? I mean,
Yes.
they come under a lot of fire for that, right? From the other side.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah.
But the whole PC-ness. I mean, it's like it's going to get to. It's like when we were growing up, back in my days. I know, not in you kids' days, but in my days, somebody was deaf.
It's like old man Dwight here.
Grandpa Dwight.
Somebody was deaf. Somebody was blind. Now they're visually challenged. They're hearing impaired.
Yep. You're not autistic. You're somebody with autism.
Okay, guys. Ryan Miner is going to listen to this show.
Oh, no.
And yeah, all right.
No, but,
Dwight Patel makes fun of handicapped people.
I am not
Right.
making fun. I'm just saying the point is this, it's for years we've been doing this, and now all of a sudden it's like this. It's like and it's like everyone's an engineer. They've cheapened the engineering title. A garbage man isn't a garbage man. He's a sanitation engineer. You have
I think this is Archie Bunch or.
I mean, honestly, the times where it really gets ridiculous is like
times they are
we can't
changing.
call him like a fireman. It should be a fire person or whatever. It's like
Hey, what about a male
make
person?
that distinguish. Yeah.
Are
or
they gonna
I
I
change
thought it
that?
was always postmaster.
So-
I have a coworker who is from Mexico, and I said to him once because I guess I've been too inundated by politically correct people. I said something Latinx. He goes, "What is that?" I said, "Oh, that's the new politically correct term." He goes, "No, the term is Latino." Yeah, but they don't want to say that anymore because it's a male term. He's like, "No, the term is Latino."
Well,
No, that's Latinx. You're right.
He disagrees.
No, it's behind the curve.
but
Yeah,
see,
I think
that's
he's
always-
insensitive
He's a
towards
guy, that's
Latinx
why.
people.
All
But I
right,
shouldn't have assumed his gender.
See,
Sorry,
The
I
thing-
don't-
yeah, here's actually one of the issues is that none of these terms can last more than a couple years because they've got to be challenged and replaced for something
I remember
else.
when
Yep.
they were like it was Chicanos. Like
Oh, that's so old.
that
So
was like,
that's
that was
so
like the 80s, wasn't it? It was the
so
80s,
yesterday.
90s.
why do you keep dating yourself?
The
So
90s.
Don, pull us out of this.
I do want to bring up. There's somebody just mentioned the postal service. So I want to have a brief discussion about all the stimulus and the bailout real briefly, because the postal service has now come onto the radar of should money go to them because they are saying that they might run out of money by September. They were already hurting before all of this because first class mail volume has been dropping by just by huge percentages, but they're getting hurt even more so now too because if businesses are shut down, even the businesses that were using the mail aren't using the mail. So they have a huge problem there. And then also, because Mark, you've done a lot of stuff with airlines, also with the airline bailout and some of the interesting things that have been going on there, airline traffic, passenger traffic has plummeted.
To say
Lots
plummeted,
of-
it actually doesn't even do it justice. It is the numbers of people who are going through TSA, which is probably the best metric, is off 96%.
Uh-huh.
That is a huge drop.
Who's going to
How
want to
does
sit?
airlines survive?
I mean, that's another thing though. Is even when things go back to normal, who's going to want to sit in the middle seat on an airplane? Or, I mean,
don't sit on the middle seat of an airplane now.
Well, yeah, I there even after the 2008 downturn, it took a couple of years for there to be recovery. So, a lot of folks in the aviation industry do not expect a recovery until 2023, 2024.
yeah. And like,
I mean, and this is different, obviously, than there are other sectors of the economy that will respond quickly, but aviation is expected to take a very long time to recover.
I know lots of business travel from people I've been talking.
9/11 for the recovery. After 9/11, how long did it take the airlines to recover? Because I know they took a hit after
Years.
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 And
Yeah. I mean, actually, and even what I was saying is 2008, because part of what happens is businesses, when they're cutting back, the first thing that goes is business travel.
Absolutely. Yep.
I think now it's going to be even worse with the advent of Zoom, right? People
Absolutely.
are realizing some business travel might not be necessary. I know lots of companies that I'm familiar with, either through relatives working there or whatnot, are talking about annual meetings or things of that nature just being put completely online. It's insanely expensive to fly your entire company or your entire executive team out to a certain location. Why not just do it over Zoom? And they've learned for years, there's been the naysayers saying, oh, we've got to meet in person, there's tremendous value. But when you've been forced by the crisis to say, we're doing it online, and you end up getting the same output, why would you pay to fly everyone somewhere? And that's not going to change when the economy is good, because no one's going to want to have a cost that's unnecessary.
Yep.
I mean, with government,
Well, government doesn't count because they don't care about being cost
but
effective.
I've been on calls where they go, oh, we like these Zoom calls, but we can't wait till we all meet in person. And
Yeah.
I was talking to somebody today. Go, yeah, we're planning a big bash when things all open up. We're gonna have a big party.
I'm sure it's on the taxpayer's dime.
But that's certainly, but that's not inconsistent with a sharp drop off in the regular air traffic that's going to take place.
Kenzie and
Sure. There are people who I knew even before coronavirus who you get on the plane, the first thing they do is pull out their Lysol wipes and wipe everything down because they don't, if you look at how quickly planes turn over in order to keep things going, they're not wiping that plane down head to toe.
And also, I used to like to fly a lot, but after to go through those TSA lines, even I know everyone says, "Oh, I should get the TSA clear card."
You should
I have
Yeah.
pre-check.
Pre-check is
It's
good.
great.
get pre-check. It's much easier.
But
Regular
sometimes the
lines always been
pre-check line
short
is
for me versus
longer.
pre-check.
But you know what because it used to be I could show my not FAA badge, but my government badge. They before 9/11 happened, you could use the government badge and they'd wave you in.
Now I think you have to work for Homeland Security.
Actually, it's FAA or Homeland Security now.
Yeah, it was weird. Like I had mentioned, I'd been watching
And-
Taxi, and there was an episode where they go to the airport, and they were just like walked right up to the gate, like, "Hey, I'm looking for my daughter that I haven't met." I'm like, I can't even imagine that because I was 4 when 9/11 happened. So
That's part of why I've always been a bigger fan of Amtrak than the plane, because it still is much like that. There's the convenience of you just
So-
walk
And
to the
actually,
platform.
one of the things the airlines and the airports are going to have to take a look at is the TSA experience, because the whole phenomena of waiting in line for however long it is close to other people is going to have to get re-examined to make it safer.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
I don't want to get you in trouble, Mark, but how much of the TSA was there before for, I guess, comforting people as opposed to actually securing things? I know, there's always headlines every few years
Yeah,
of,
no. Sure, more and more of the security process is on the back end of knowing who's scheduled to be on a plane and then doing a check to see who they are and what they're doing. And more security features. For example, when you get on an international flight, the idea is that they take a picture and you get on and they do a visual examination, check you against that database. So a lot more has been automated and is less less of the security sort of activity is with the actual check-in process.
Well,
Yeah.
I've always found it interesting. I've never seen this anywhere else, but in the 2 times that I've gone to Israel, when you get to the airport in the United States, and it's where you're checking in for El Al Airlines, the first thing you have to do after you give them your bags is you go talk to a person,
Right.
and they interrogate you. Did you pack your bag by yourself? Did anybody give you something to take with you? They take it so seriously just to go to the state of Israel, and I'm curious if they do that for any other countries.
So a shameless plug here, since Dwight is the master of the shameless plug, is that
I haven't
when
even had that-
when United Airlines started its direct flights last year to Tel Aviv, I doubt very much they're going now, but I'm sure they'll continue at some point. What United did was institute the required Israeli steps, and so it took up much more of the space, and there were security people who did all that kind of questioning process and were able to incorporate the procedures that Israel has at Dulles.
And it's interesting that kind of thing hasn't been more widespread, in my opinion.
Well,
Especially in the times when ISIS was really, really bad, that kind of thing.
Well, I tell you this, last time I flew to Europe, I flew the Empire's airline of choice, British Airways, the official airline of the British Empire. They, basically they're not really as, they're pretty much, basically they'll ask you at the ticket counter, hey, did you pack all your bags? Yeah, I did. Do you think, it's like, it's very much based on trust, it's like.
No, actually really isn't. They checked who Dwight Patel was, and there are some very sophisticated databases.
Because all they do is they ask, and just
No, because they know who you are.
It's going on behind the scenes, like
it's going on behind the scenes, Dwight.
especially I'm sure Mark has more insight into it than just publicly.
And that's why all that sourcing stuff that Jackie. That's why I don't want to. They're gonna know in a second. You brushed past who?
Right.
Yeah, but I think the point is when you read headlines like 95% of the tests cases get through the pat through and through the metal detector without detecting anything. It seems that that's not really doing much good, but a lot of what they're doing that you may not see and that doesn't really inconvenience you is effective, presumably. So you can do that and not have coronavirus concerns around it, not have sanitary concerns, not have the inconvenience of dealing with the TSA and missing your flight. Just because I don't know if anyone here watches Curb Your Enthusiasm, but in the season, he missed his flight because he had to get through the TSA and he got randomly selected. So, big issue. But those sorts of inconveniences that are a part of flying.
They're going to get rid of it, but there are, there are things that can be done to make that process easier. But I would certainly recommend getting either Clear or TSA Pre.
Yeah.
Definitely worth its weight in gold, especially if you travel around the holidays.
I actually might have to do that because just because I go to Houston.
Yeah. From my experience, Clear is better, but it's not at every airport.
Yes, that's
CWI's got Clear.
Yeah, they do.
I already had pre-checks, so at that point, it's not worth getting the new one.
Yeah.
One last fun thing before we do our final go round here is just that I don't know how many of you saw the Nancy Pelosi appearance with James the other night. So she's there. I mean, she's been ribbed mercilessly for this and called, tone deaf because they were talking with her and she's in her kitchen in San Francisco and she's standing in front of the.
Hey, was she making restaurant?
$25,000 Sub-Zero refrigerators, right?
Yeah, they were very expensive refrigerators. There, either a Sub-Zero or Viking or something like that.
I think it was a Viking.
So proud of her freezer drawer, which was full of ice cream. I mean, in a time period where people are suffering, what is the deal with Nancy Pelosi?
Yeah, and I think it's especially insensitive. I don't care as much about the $25,000, whether it's Sub-Zero or Viking is less relevant. But I care more about the Instacart. I ordered Instacart yesterday, and they only had lactate-free ice cream. So for Nancy Pelosi to be hoarding ice cream,
God, God.
I
How
mean,
dare.
this is a disgrace. This is almost as bad as hoarding toilet paper. I know some people on this call are guilty of
Why
that, so I
you
don't
just
want
go out to the store and go find your own.
Hey,
call
Ryan,
anyone out. But
That
it,
doesn't mean
Right.
they have it. If they don't have it on
No.
Instacart, they're not hoarding it at the store.
no, they're not hoarding at the store. But the reason they don't have any is because Nancy Pelosi bought all of it. She needs
Exactly.
something to put in her $25,000 freezer.
Ryan, Kensington Safeway does have Breyers.
They have Breyers and Rice-A-Roni. Apparently, I'm
Well,
going to the
good,
wrong
now
grocery
you just
store.
told everyone where to go get the ice cream. By the time Ryan gets there, it'll be gone.
Yeah. Ryan
Yeah,
Miner's
we're
gonna have ice cream before I do now.
We're right up against the hour, guys. Let's just go around with final thoughts. Let's start with Jason.
Oh gosh, final thoughts.
Okay, we'll start with Jackie.
Yeah.
I heard Jackie.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm losing my mind. That's my final thought. I don't know, my dogs were very vocal tonight, so give your pets lots of treats or they'll bark during your live broadcasts.
All right, Mark.
I'm looking forward to going to the beach this summer, and I hope that everything, whatever phase we're on, it includes being able to go to the beach.
You're gonna go to the Hamptons?
You gotta go to Florida then.
All right,
No.
now Jason.
Oh, so I missed out on St. Patrick's Day. I usually wear some kind of fun outfits for holidays. So now I just got to double down for 4th of July. So I'm excited for that. Even if it doesn't happen out in public, I'm going to be walking around my apartment complex and whatever I decide to
Dressed
wear.
as Uncle Sam.
All right, Dwight.
Okay, a couple things. Final thoughts. One, get your NASA eclipse class. We have an eclipse coming. But in all honesty, I think we're adjusting. Here's the thing. Challenges. This country's faced challenges all the time, and we've overcome every challenge. This is just another hurdle. Because that's what makes America a great country. I know I've just triggered every lefty watching the show. But honestly,
All two.
actually, there's
That's a record.
A troll.
What proportion of our 5 viewers are members of the Democratic Party?
And McHugh. He's a big rhino.
Yeah.
But Ed Edmondson liked our show. He gave us a thumbs up.
Dan McHugh. Jason, you have to tell Dan that you were kidding about that. Okay.
Oh, yes.
Dan,
Right.
I'm
He's
kidding.
gonna get a call as soon as we end
Honestly, I'm
broadcast.
not- sorry, Ryan.
I'm really glad you made me after Dwight because my comment is going to set him off. So he's done. He can't speak. We were promised the Spiro Agnew themed show and did not get one reference to Spiro Agnew. So with that, I think we've got to end the show right now. Okay, Don, I'll toss it back to you.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. I just want everybody to remember to stay safe, stay well. Just take the precautions you need to take. We are the greatest country in the world. Everybody here, stay safe, stay well. Have a great weekend. Anybody else sign off?
Hey, thank you, everyone.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. God bless.
The last 2 weeks, Ryan, you